Good morning. I hope everyone was able to grab some food, drink, get the morning started. Thanks for coming out this morning. We're so happy to host you at IDC's Capitol Hill Advocacy Day 2024. We had hoped for better weather, but hopefully you guys stay dry. The good part about it is you're going to be indoors most of the day. Getting over to Capitol Hill, we'll be taking the Metro or Uber. We usually take Metro. But you can get there as you wish. And then once we're there, we'll be mostly inside. Most of the buildings on the Capitol grounds, are connected underground, so that'll be helpful to stay out of the bad weather. So, once again, good morning. My name is Richard Ghazal, Executive Director of In Defense of Christians. Get these slides to work. There we go. Great. So, most of you, I believe all of you here have already checked in. If you haven't already, you can go to the desk, get your name card, and get yourself accounted for. We're going to brief you this morning. We're going to try to make it quick so we can get ourselves over to Capitol Hill. We are on a schedule. We hope to depart by 9 o'clock. We're supposed to take a group photo in front of the Capitol on the steps at 9:30. That's what we do every year. It's our tradition. Given the weather, we're going to play that by ear. It seems to have halted or at least slowed down. So hopefully we get a little window to take that group photo. Once we take the photo, we'd all kind of disperse by group to our first meeting of the day. In your information folders, you have your detailed itinerary with your meetings, room numbers, and a bit of what your day is going to look like. You'll have your first set of meetings till noon. At noon, you'll have lunch with your group. We'll talk more about that in the slides. And then, of course, we'll close out with congressional meetings and then depart Capitol Hill. On the slide here, it says 4 o'clock. Our last meeting of the day, if I'm not mistaken, we have a new couple meetings that were added. I believe the last one is at 4:30, so of course that'll be flexible. Let's see here. And then the IDC leadership debrief, again, that's going to flex a little bit, probably be at 5 o'clock here at the office. And that's only the leadership of each group who needs to attend that. That's not something that you all would have to come back to. You're free to go after your last meeting. There we go. All right, so group leaders have been identified. You've already been briefed in what your responsibilities are as group leader. We have a single text group that all group leadership is on to communicate important matters to be disseminated to each group. On your way to Capitol Hill, you will meet your group. In fact, after we're done briefing, you're free to coalesce into groups so you can introduce yourselves to each other, where you're from, and that sort of thing. On your way to Capitol Hill, it's good to express to your group leader, who will identify himself for you or herself for you. You can let them know your level of comfort in speaking, if you wish to speak, and so on and so forth. It'll be up to the group leader, of course, to control the message and make sure everybody gets some time with the member or their staff during the meeting. What can I bring with me to the Capitol, right? So if you wouldn't bring it on a plane as a carry-on, then you can't bring it into the Capitol. So we're talking size as well as item, right? So weapons, leave them at home. If you brought it with you, just leave. So no oversized bags is really the important thing. If you're early to a meeting, that's fine. In fact, that's good. It's better than late. But just don't loiter in the waiting room inside the office, and don't even loiter outside the door. It's good to just walk and see the Capitol a little bit, and then report in about 10 minutes or so before your meeting. So when you're waiting for your meeting, you'll be in the waiting area, and they're probably going to offer you food or drink, and that's fine. Feel free to accept that. But in the meeting, try not to eat during the meeting, or at least take cues. If you find the staffer drinking or snacking on something, I guess that's okay. That's not a problem. When you're speaking to a member of Congress, try not to be eating. No chewing gum, obviously. Some of you have member meetings this morning and throughout the day. Others have staff meetings. Some have a mix of them. If you don't have a member meeting, if you're meeting with the staff, don't be surprised if the member walks into the meeting. Oftentimes, senators and congressmen will walk in based on their calendar, if their daily calendar changes, or if it's a subject matter that interests them, they'll pop in. Expect that. When they do enter the room, be sure to stand, and try not to sit until they sit, unless they direct you to take your seat. That's fine. Handshake is always good. A firm handshake. And one thing is to be comfortable, be sociable with a member of Congress. They're not movie stars. They're representing us. We elect them. They're there at our behest and at our service. But don't be too familiar. It's always Mr., Mrs., Senator, Congressman, Congresswoman, that kind of thing. No first names, obviously. Many of your groups, in fact, have constituents of the members with whom you'll be meeting. Be sure to highlight who those constituents are. If you have a group that does not have a constituent of that particular congressional office, don't highlight that either. Just don't even mention it. So they're happy to meet with you either way. When you're meeting with them, the topics of discussion, of course, are ones of great importance to all of us. That's why you're here. So speak with passion, speak with conviction. But please avoid, especially in this season, avoid overtly political speech. We're not there to say who we want to be elected as president. We're not there to talk about any other social issues or economic issues, though they are probably deeply held, and I hold them deeply as well as many of you. But we're there for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to speak for persecuted Christians in the Middle East and around the world. So stay on message. We're representing IDC today. There'll be other opportunities for other kinds of speech. And be sure to thank the member and or the staffer. Of course, gratitude goes a long way, especially with people who are serving their nation. Lunch is on everybody's mind, I'm sure. It's always on mine. So lunch will vary based on your group's schedule. Whenever there's a good size break of at least an hour, that's probably the right time to grab lunch. You must remain with your group. So the group that you're assigned to take meetings, that's who you're going to be having lunch with. You're going to come to love each other just great. So the nearest cafeteria to your next meeting is where I'd suggest going for lunch. You don't want to finish up lunch and then realize you have a 20-minute walk ahead of you. It's best to find the nearest cafeteria to your next meeting. The Longworth cafeteria generally is the largest and probably has the most options for whatever that's worth. And please don't leave Capitol Hill. There are enough dining facilities and places to grab a bite on the Hill. No need to leave. Photography and social media is encouraged. Last year, we had a professional team following us around on the Hill. Unfortunately, they were pretty much shut down by each office, which wasn't a surprise, but that's okay. Individual photography and that sort of thing is generally allowed, unlike a professional following you around. So keep that in mind. But yeah, snap photos liberally. Post them, share them, put them on social media, tag IDC, that sort of thing. If you meet with a member, if you have a member meeting, certainly grab a picture of your group with that member. Oftentimes the staff will offer to take a photo for you, but be sure to leave your email address with the staff member so they can get that to you. And we ask that any photos taken today, videos, that sort of thing, share them back with us. Anything we get, we'll also share mutually with groups. If you have free time, and many of you will have free time if you take a look at your itinerary today, feel free to go to the Capitol Visitor Center, and we'll point that out to you in just a second on the map. There you can take a tour of the Capitol if you haven't already. But when you're doing that, obviously be mindful of your time when your next meeting is. Make sure you have a good cushion there built in. And of course, just conceal your name tag when you're on the tour, because when you're in meetings, you're representing IDC. When you're on the tour, you're just in your own capacity. So that would be appreciated. And then for more details as to anything I said, please refer to your packet, detailed itinerary there, maps, and so forth. And ask your group leader if you have any other questions that are not addressed in your packet, and they'll text the leadership team back. For the group leaders, as I said, we'll be flexible as to the after-action debrief here back at the office. It was supposed to be at 4 or 4:30, I believe, but given the fact that we've added a few more meetings throughout the day, that may be pushed back, but we'll keep you updated in the group chat. All right, so here's a DC Metro map. Y'all are familiar with it, I'm sure. Right now at the IDC office, we're at McPherson Square, which is on the blue, silver, and orange line. All right, so we're going to Capitol South Station, which is a red star. So you can get any one of those lines, orange, silver, or blue, and it'll get you there. And it's only, 5 or so stops. So it's about a 10-minute metro ride. So you're going to get off at Capitol South. And when you get off at Capitol South, the metro station, Capitol South, is the red star. It's just south of the Cannon Building. You're going to walk past the Cannon, between the Longworth and Cannon Building, toward the Capitol. We're going to meet on the Capitol steps, the green star. That's where we're going to take our photo, our group photo, weather permitting, and my fingers are crossed. Once we take that photo at the green star, then you can disperse to your first meetings of the day indicated on your itinerary in the packet. Getting over to the Metro, we'll all walk as a group, just for simplicity, so we leave no man behind or woman behind. Any questions on the first part of today's briefing? Crystal clear? Okay. Excellent. If you have any questions, please, yes.
Sorry, where did you say was the nearest metro station?
It's called McPherson Square. In fact, I should probably point it out. It's one block down 15th. So it's very close. But we'll all walk together as a group, so we all have accountability with each other. Anyone else? Great. Now, the next portion of the briefing is more substantive. The first part was sort of housekeeping, logistics. The substantive portion of the briefing could go on for hours and even days because of the subject matter, of course. Given the tight timeline, it's going to be sort of a bird's eye view, a quick survey, just enough to get you familiar. So we're here to advocate for the Christians of the Middle East. That's the mission for today. But who are they? I'm sure everybody in this room is very well familiar of who we're talking about here, but it's a very diverse tableau in the Middle East among Christians. So we have Copts, Syriacs, which are composed of diverse groups, of course, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Maronites, Syriac Orthodox, Syriac Catholics, Armenians, members of the Byzantine Rite. Father Thomas is with us today. As well as Protestant and evangelical Christians. These are all indigenous to the Middle East. At the turn of the century, there were about 20% of the total population of the Middle East were Christians at the time. Since then, since the Ottoman genocide, since ISIS genocide, since a series of events, genocide, political changes, and so on and so forth, it's plummeted to below 2%, which is a dramatic change in a century's time. And one thing that's for sure is the Middle East without Christians is a prospect that the world cannot afford, and we'll talk about why that is. So throughout the years, throughout the centuries, Christians in the Middle East have served a very specific role. They're a multilingual, multi-ethnic community. They're a host and purveyors of various ideas. They're pioneers of the arts, sciences, and humanities, not just in the Middle East, but dispersed throughout the world. And also their presence in that community, in the Middle East, in every community in which they've existed. They've cultivated a deep-rooted sense of tolerance, of understanding, of loving thy neighbor. You know, that love thy neighbor, it's a Christian principle, but it was infectious to all communities in the Middle East, as we've observed throughout the centuries. And they've also served a moderating effect on moderate Muslim communities. When you see the person living beside you is a Christian, you can put humanity to that title Christian. Without Christians being present, they are now sort of a caricature of what anybody wants you to believe they are. Now, a homogeneous Middle East, void of Christians, is a dangerous prospect. It would destroy the social balance that has existed for centuries. It would cause a narrowing of ideas, identities, and beliefs, and allow radicals to reach a one-time moderate Muslim community. In addition to that, the world stands to lose something very special should the Christians be eradicated from the region. A common heritage shared by worldwide Christendom, including the West. So Christianity in the East is what spread Christianity throughout the world. Eastern Christianity throughout the world is what provides access to the mind, culture, and worldview that gave birth to Christianity 2,000 years ago. The absence of Middle Eastern Christianity from the Middle East and throughout the world would leave an absence that would be irreplaceable and a void that would never be filled again. So really the bottom line here is this is not a political matter. It's nothing less, nothing short of a civilizational question that we're dealing with here today. So for 2 millennia, Christians have been stuck in the middle with nobody to speak on their behalf, no one at the table to speak on their behalf. But today you all speak on their behalf when you're meeting with members of Congress and their staffs. So it's a heavy burden, but it's one that we've all taken on voluntarily because of the grave importance of this subject matter today. So that's sort of an overview. Next, we're going to talk about the specifics, the legislation that we'll be discussing today. And based on the group you're assigned to, so we have an Iraq group, an Egypt group, Armenia group, and so forth, those are the ones that are specifically going to apply to you based on that group. But, obviously it's a great education to hear what the various groups are doing. So Christians of Iraq, as we spoke in just a slide previously, the precipitous decline of the population of Christians throughout the Middle East. Well, Iraq is a perfect example of that tragic phenomenon. In 2003, just 20 years ago, there was 1.5 million Christians in Iraq. Today, there's less than 150,000. That's like move the decimal place over one spot. So in 20 years, it's dropped by 90%. I don't know that history has ever recorded numbers quite that dramatic. And the genocide didn't stop in 1915, right? There was one that occurred, of course, that we all know, perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire. Just 10 years ago, ISIS continued that genocide in the form of the ISIS genocide. Killed thousands of Christians over the course of just a couple years, but uprooted many more from their homes. And nearly a decade later, here we are 10 years later in 2024, and many Christians are still internally displaced in Iraq. Due largely to the fact that ISIS's vacuum was filled by none other than Iran, who occupies the homes and territories of the Christians that belonged to them for thousands of years. Christians remain victims of religiously motivated violence, widespread discrimination, and token political representation. In other words, they don't have an equal seat at the table. Even in Iraq, where seats are afforded to them to take part in government and in parliament, even those are hijacked and taken over by bad actors, in this case specifically Iran. Latest development about a week and a half ago, which is very troubling, in fact, is that the U.S. and Iraq have reportedly come to an agreement to withdraw troops by September 2025 from Iraq proper, Baghdad, and by 2026 from the KRI, from the Kurdistan region of Iraq. That's northern Iraq. This is troubling specifically because it's the American presence that's been the deterrent from Iran's menacing presence. So with the U.S. Withdrawing potentially in a year or less than a year, it only stands to get worse. So to address this issue, there is House Resolution 554, which is a legislative instrument to affirm U.S. support for ethno-religious minority survivors of the Iraq genocide. It was introduced by Representative Slotkin, and it outlines the factors that drive the demographic change in Iraq, but also says that we as the United States stand by you and lays out the plan as to how they can do that. And a big part of that is U.S. presence. So that announcement, that agreement that supposedly came out last week, hasn't come out officially from the U.S. State Department, but it came out through various channels, directly opposes the intention of this legislation. So really it's important to underscore that very point. It'll send a strong message both to the Iraqi government, the KRI, the KRG, as well as the U.S. government that this is too important to step away from, because the hard-fought battle against ISIS by U.S. and coalition troops will be essentially gone for waste if this happens. As of right now, there are 10 bipartisan co-sponsors. Just recently in July, it reported out of committee, which is a great thing, but it's still waiting a vote in the full House of Representatives. So for those of you meeting on this issue today, you have those slides, and we'll know you do just great. Condemning the genocide of Artsakh. This is having to do with the expulsion of Christian Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh exactly 1 year ago. In fact, it was exactly a year ago to the day, in fact, I believe. In December 2020, Azerbaijan attempted to smother Artsakh with a blockade. So they shut down all channels, no food, medicine, medical equipment, anything could get through. And that was sustained for about 10 months, which was disastrous for the people, the Christians of Nagorno-Karabakh. As I said, 1 year ago in September 2023, that blockade culminated in a bombing campaign by Azerbaijan against the Christians of Nagorno-Karabakh, which concluded in a surrender by the Christians in that area. And they were forced to flee their land that they've lived in for thousands of years. This is their homeland. This is not a land that they've occupied for a short period of time. So 120,000 people were forced to evacuate in 24 hours, and it caused an incredible humanitarian disaster. Now, the reason this happened, one of the reasons this happened, is because under federal law, federal U.S. law, the United States government is not allowed or unable to provide military assistance to Azerbaijan because they have a record of human rights violations. However, there is a waiver authority in that law saying that the president, under his own, has his own prerogative to waive that that prohibition and continue to provide arms to Azerbaijan. And that's exactly, unfortunately, what the White House has been doing, this administration and previous administrations as well. So that's a problem. What House Bill 7288 seeks to do is discontinue that presidential waiver authority so that the law kicks into effect and stops U.S. arms, U.S. military assistance to going from to go to Azerbaijan. So that's an important thing. The great news is last year, November 2023, the Senate passed the same bill, the counterpart bill, unanimously in the Senate. In the House of Representatives, it has 39 bipartisan co-sponsors. That's a great thing. It's bipartisan, but it's still sitting in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So the Armenia group, you got your work cut out for you. You know exactly what you're doing. So need I say more? Exactly. So we're going to do great things today. USARF reauthorization. This is not one that we have a specific group assigned to, but it's something that every group can mention in the course of their meetings. It's a very short piece, in fact. So USARF is a United States commission. It's a bipartisan commission that serves as a watchdog for international religious freedom issues. So they advise the White House as well as Congress, the State Department and Congress, on human rights, specifically international religious freedom matters. They have a couple classifications that they use to classify different countries and non-state actors. That is country of particular concern and special watch list. The country of particular concern designation is the top tier. The special watch list is second. The law, the statute that created this commission, USARF, basically, in layman's term, expires every 2 years and requires reauthorization to fund it every 2 years. It's up this year, so there's legislation now in the House of Representatives to reauthorize it for another 2 years through 2026. The good news is, so that's the House bill. The good news is the Senate passed the bill just last week. It was passed in the Senate, so that's great news. So the House of Representatives is really all we need to work on to get that commission refunded once again for another 2 years.
Give us the Senate House bill.
Pardon?
Just give us the House bill number.
Yes, certainly. So it's House Bill 7025, and that's USARF reauthorization. So it was reported out of committee a couple months ago in July, and it's just waiting for a vote in the full House. And a big talking point when you're meeting with House staff or members is to let them know that, hey, the Senate passed this just last week. This is not a controversial, it's just reauthorizing what's already there, and then, of course, underscoring the need. So in Nigeria, jihadist insurgencies, as you probably are familiar, have been causing issues in the north, the majority Islamic north of Nigeria, but also causing violence, as some would describe as genocide, in the south Christian majority areas of Nigeria. Nigeria, in fact, is the deadliest place to be a Christian on earth because in 2023, over 5,000 Christians were slaughtered based on their religion by both Boko Haram, which is an ISIS franchise. Boko Haram and ISIS are really one and the same, just under a different name, as well as Fulani militants. Christians killed in Nigeria account for over 80% of all Christians killed for their faith around the world. I mean, it's staggering. But it's an area of the world. It's a flashpoint of Christian persecution that's often ignored, but not us. We're not ignoring it today. We have a group, in fact, two groups who are going to be talking on this particular point. But not only is this genocide happening at the hands of Boko Haram against Christians, but the Nigerian government has been woefully incompetent in their response. In fact, their response is more damaging than even the initial persecution because they answer atrocities with even more and worse atrocities. I'm going to spare you the gruesome details so early in the morning, but very, very, very troubling reports if you're following it. Despite USCIRF's recommendation, we just talked about USCIRF, right, the commission just a moment ago, annually they recommend that the State Department put them on the country of particular concern list. That's the top tier of religious freedom violators. But year after year, the State Department refuses to add them. But it's even worse than that is a couple of years ago, they were on that country of particular concern list. The State Department actively took them off that list. So it's not like they're just failing to add them. They actively took them off the list in 2021, 2022, and have refused to restore that status since then. So huge concern. What this piece of legislation seeks to do that we're dealing with today, House Resolution 82, it calls on the U.S. State Department to add Nigeria to the country of particular concern list, right? Because as if it wasn't enough that the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has been recommending this strongly. Hopefully the House of Representatives would have an effect and be able to move the needle in the State Department just a little bit. Now the unfortunate part here is while there are 33 co-sponsors, which is a great thing, it's overwhelmingly Republican. I think there's one Democrat, 32 Republicans who co-sponsored this particular resolution. One thing to really hit home with the members or staff that you meet with today is this is not a part. I mean, if you read the legislation, and I urge you all to do so, it's not very long. It's not partisan in its language or in its message or its effect. But unfortunately, DC is how it is often, and it becomes sort of a high school game of who introduced it. Do I like him? Did he rub me the wrong way? So unfortunately, hopefully we can see past that and allow members and staff to see past that. It was reported out of committee a couple months ago in July of this year and awaiting a full vote in the House of Representatives. So regarding the Copts of Egypt, we have a group who's going to be addressing this as well. Unfortunately, there is not a discrete piece of legislation to this effect, and we'll talk about just in a moment why, but just sort of a brief overview of the Copts, and I'm sure, again, most of us here are familiar with this community. They're one of the oldest existing Christian communities in the world, certainly in the Middle East, but certainly in the world. More than 10 million Copts live in Egypt, and that's an estimate. It could be more. They comprise about 10% of the total Egyptian population, which makes them the largest Christian community in the Middle East. They suffer from endemic culture of religious persecution and a culture of impunity. So acts of violence carried out against Copts often go unaddressed and unprosecuted. Oftentimes when there's a violent crime against a Coptic person in Egypt at the provincial level, they won't take it to trial, but rather they'll order what's known as a reconciliation council, where they'll drag the Christian in and talk it out and essentially force the Christian to forgive the Muslim who carried out the act of violence against them. So I'm not sure what kind of justice that is, but it's certainly not the type that would keep a community sustainable for the next 2,000 years. Christians remain the victims of religiously motivated violence, widespread discrimination with token political representation. The same thing we talked about in Iraq, same thing in Syria, same thing in Lebanon, same thing throughout the Middle East. There's no unique suffering of any of these communities, and that's unfortunate. So the legislation that supports Copts is introduced perennially. So every Congress, the 116th, 117th, unfortunately, it dies in committee. It never makes it to the House, the full House, for a vote, which is unfortunate, and that's because lack of prioritization. So what we hope to do today, and what our friends at Coptic Orphans do on a daily basis, is they press the urgency of this issue to give it some priority and give it some gravitas on Capitol Hill. So I know they're going to do a great job. Any questions? Sir, I think we have a mic, in fact. One moment. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Regarding the Iraq resolution and the other ones, when we meet with a member's office, they're going to say, well, what do you want? So we want them to co-sponsor the legislation. That's right.
That's correct, yes. So you're going to ask them to support it. You're going to explain to them what the status is. The status of that particular one, it was reported out of committee, so it's no longer in committee for consideration. It's now with the full House of Representatives, so you're going to say, we ask for your support, and you tell them why. You basically talk about the plight of the Christians in that part of the world, whether it's Iraq or elsewhere, and then ask for their support. Make the case, essentially. Yep.
So both the members that we're meeting with are not co-sponsors, so we would ask them to co-sponsor.
That's correct. That's correct. My hearing is not great, but I was able to hear you quite well. Thank you. Any other questions? Great.